know how you feel, but that song will preach. If you have your scriptures, turn over to Romans 12, and we'll also be reading out of Proverbs 11. Romans 12 and Proverbs 11. Well, during the Battle of the Wilderness in the Civil War, Union General John Sedgwick was inspecting his troops, but he was out in front of his troops, and the enemy was about 1,000 yards away. And he was trying to rally his troops, but his people kept saying, "Sir, you're up on this horse, you're exposed, you should get down." And he kept saying, No, it's fine, it's fine. And then they kept asking him, "Sir, you're exposed, you're a general, get down." And he said, "Nonsense. They couldn't hit an elephant at this dist." And he fell to the ground, wounded and died a short time later. The cost of pride. The cost of pride. Last week we kicked off a new series called The 7 Saving Graces Above the 7 Deadly Sins. And so we're taking this ancient list of the 7 deadly sins, and we're talking about how God has an answer for our struggles when it comes to sin. And last week we looked at the question of Jesus to the paralyzed man. Do you want to be well? Do you want to be whole? And I still believe that is a question that God is asking to all of us. Do you want to be well? Do you want me to make you whole? Well, over the course of human history, we've seen that this list that we call the 7 deadly sins are common struggles to mankind. And so starting this week, we're going to look at each one of those struggles and talk about how God provides help to us. He provides grace to aid us in the fight. And so the starting point is the first one on the list, and that is pride. Now, pride is a hard one to talk about because I don't know about you, but I hear a sermon on pride, and sometimes I think about me, but probably more often I think about other people. Like, I hope so-and-so is hearing this because, man, they need this sermon on pride. And the reason that this is because pride is one of the hardest things to self-diagnose, but one of the easiest things to diagnose in others. I've heard it said that pride makes everyone sick except the one who has it. It deadens us to our own flaws and makes us hypersensitive to the flaws of others. It is deafness of the soul. It makes us rude and critical. It causes us to believe that we're right even in the face of facts to the contrary. It causes us to be self-absorbed in our conversations where we don't listen to whatever people are saying, but we're far more concerned about how we're coming across. And then we replay those conversations in our head and think about how it relates to our self-image. It thrives off of comparison and competition. It's powerful. C.S. Lewis said, if you want to find out how proud you are, the easiest way is to ask yourself, how much do I dislike it when other people snub me or refuse to take notice of me? And I'm guessing that when I started talking about pride, there's probably a few people that popped into your head like, well, sounds like this person. But pride has been called the root of other sins because when we become absorbed in ourselves, we will then make decisions to give ourselves what we think we deserve, which is whatever we want. So indeed, pride often is the root of a lot of our problems, but again, it's hard for someone who struggles with pride to even realize it. And traditionally, the offset to pride, the traditional answer to this part of the 7 deadly sins is humility. If you're proud, well then you need to be more humble. The problem with that is people who are proud usually think they are humble because pride makes you blind. So just saying to a proud person, be more humble, is not very effective. And another problem is that humility is not something we can just manufacture. You will not just wake up one morning and go, I'm going to be more humble, and then truly be more humble. But what happens instead is the decision to try to be more humble often leads to more pride because, hey, I'm humble. I'm way more humble than you are. One of my favorite parts of any of the Marvel movies is this scene where one of the characters says, I too am extraordinarily humble. Another interesting thing about proud people is they often notice humility in other people and try to imitate it themselves. Because they think, if I act more like this person, people will then admire me. And so what's interesting is pride can actually encourage us to develop virtue as long as people are noticing we are developing virtue. And it makes us feel good. Steve Deneff said, pride has the power to distort any other virtue by turning it into something that reminds us of heaven but actually comes straight from hell. Now don't get me wrong, pride means that you need to develop humility, but the problem again is you can't just manufacture humility. But to develop true humility, you need a change of mindset. It has to be something internal, not external. Developing humility is not just like deciding to get in shape where, hey, I'm just going to start exercising and I will get in shape. But something in you has to change to develop a heart of humility. So humility alone is not the answer to pride. But what if the saving grace to pride isn't humility, but it's wisdom? What if it's wisdom? Proverbs 11:2, if you had your hand in the scriptures there, says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with the humble is wisdom. But with the humble is wisdom. So what you see here is the writer of the Proverbs says that in order to not be proud, in order to be humble, it means you have wisdom. And one more passage, Romans 12:3, if you have that marked as well. Paul says this, by the grace given to me, I say to anyone among you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought to think, that's pride, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith God has assigned. So Paul says, don't think too highly of yourself, which is pride, but think in sober judgment, which sounds a lot like wisdom to me. To think with sober judgment. And this is the real problem of pride. Pride is not about thinking highly of yourself. It's thinking more highly of yourself than you should. It's about seeing yourself through a false lens. It's about being unwise in your view of yourself. And one thing you see throughout Scripture, especially in the book of Proverbs, is this tension between two things that they call folly and wisdom. Folly and wisdom. And through the Proverbs, you see it presented as kind of a choice. You will either live with wisdom or you will live with folly or foolishness. And what you often find is that pride is presented as an attribute of foolishness or folly, and humility is an attribute that comes by gaining wisdom. Proverbs 29:23 says, one's pride will bring him low, but who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. And so on one hand, you have folly, and folly is a good time. It's going to, folly is going to get you what you want immediately. It's bad for you in the long run, but it's naturally appealing in the short term. On the other hand is wisdom. Wisdom is a good life. Wisdom is restraint that leads to better things. Wisdom is good for you in the long run, but naturally unappealing in the short term. And this is where we see that pride truly is foolishness. It's folly. The root of pride is not overconfidence, but it's foolishness. The root of pride is not overconfidence, it's foolishness. It's the failure to see ourselves as we really are. When we are foolish, we have an inflated image of ourselves. We don't see ourselves as everyone else sees us, but we have this built-up image, this alternate reality, where we ignore things that tell us the opposite and embellish the things that make us look good. And so folly is the separation of our true selves from reality. And that causes us often to revolt against boundaries. So in pride or foolishness, we refuse to get old, we refuse to get sick, we refuse to be wrong, we don't take our losses gracefully. Folly is the difference between who you think you are and who you really are. And when we live in this foolishness, we think our achievements are better than they are. Our position is more important than it is. We think more people are watching us and hanging on our every word than there actually are. And so what's needed to combat this is wisdom. We need wisdom. And what wisdom does is show us who we truly are. There was a man in an airport at the end of a long line, and he rudely pushed himself to the front of the line and demanded, "I have to be on this flight, and it has to be first class." The lady behind the counter said, "Sir, I'll happily help you once I have helped the people who are here first. So you need to get to the back of the line." The man became enraged and yelled, "Don't you know who I am?" The lady was unimpressed, and she grabbed the microphone and said, "May I have your attention, please? There is a passenger here at the gate who does not know who he is. If anyone can help him with his identity, please come to the gate at once." Well, the man was embarrassed, and with his head down, he made his way to the back of the line to the applause of everyone else in line. What that illustrates is that the sin of pride requires a wake-up call. It requires us to be put back into our place, to have it revealed to us who we truly are, that we're not more important or better than anybody else, and it's not to bring us too low, but to simply see ourselves who we actually are. And that's what wisdom does. And when we have wisdom, we see as things are. We see reality. Proverbs 3:13 through 18 says of wisdom, "Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain of silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are the ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace." And so I want to make one thing clear. When we talk about wisdom, we are not talking about wisdom that comes from the world. We're not talking about worldly wisdom. We are talking about the wisdom of God. The wisdom of God. And when we have the wisdom that comes from God, his wisdom shapes and shapes ourselves through the correct lens, then we will be humble. Not because we're making an effort to be humble, but because we are seeing ourselves properly within the grand scheme of things. And so then the question is, how do we get wisdom? How do we pursue godly wisdom? So I want to give us a few things this morning that I hope will help us aid in getting this godly wisdom so that we can see things as they are. First one is this: we must turn towards God. We must turn towards